Okay, this is Virtua Racing on the Sega Saturn. So you'll probably notice a few differences here from the Mega Drive and the Sega 32X one. And this is really due to it being made by a different company. This isn't made by Sega, it was, well, licensed by Time Warner, and they made their own version, and it's really like a remake. So what you'll see here is you've got the original 3 arcade tracks. So this has been played in arcade mode with the cheat, so you can play the additional career mode tracks. But you've also got another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tracks, so you've got 10 in total. But these extra tracks are not the same as the 32X one. So what I'll do is just start with Bay Bridge, because it's the one that I always tend to do on these games. I've turned the sound off here because I'll turn it back on now. It's got a CD audio soundtrack, which is quite nice. The problem is you can't turn it off in the game. And I don't think having the little jingles will be a problem, but I think if I'm playing, you know, a minute or so of the CD audio, it might set off one of the copyright detectors, which is not really what I'm trying to do. But anyway, here we go. So this will look very familiar to anyone who's played the arcade version or the Mega Drive or the 32X one. But you could probably tell off the bat, it looks good. I mean, the frame rate is a little bit inconsistent, but for the most part it's pretty good, and the draw distance is okay, and the resolution's good. I'm not sure if it's at 320 by 240 or whether it's higher, but it looks okay. The main difference is, while Time Warner have done a fairly good job with the graphics, I've got a feeling though that they've not reused the tracks. I think they're redone by eye, so they've reconstructed them from scratch. But the cars handle a little bit different, and I think this is what the problem is with the game. It doesn't feel like a conversion. It feels more like games you used to get on the Sinclair Spectrum or the Amiga or the ST. And if you think about the companies that used to convert these games, they didn't really have the ability to do a conversion or a port of it. They had to remake the game from scratch. So it's those kind of developers who would take the game and try and reimagine it in their own way, and I think this is really what Time Warner have done with this. It doesn't play like the arcade version, and the handling is different. I think with Virtua Racing in particular, you've got to learn the tracks really well, and you assume that the car will handle in a certain way, and it doesn't. Probably the most obvious one is that the cars don't quite turn as much as you'd think that they would, which is not a bad thing. I think once you've learnt the game, it's okay, but I think if you're going straight from the Mega Drive to the 32X version, this feels a little weird. I remember buying it in probably about 97. It wasn't a launch game on the platform, but it was a fairly early game on the Saturn. And I remember playing it and thinking, there's something not quite right here. And nearly hit the cows then. Reminds me of hard driving. Anyway, it doesn't quite feel right. The handling's a little bit off, but I think the biggest problem, there isn't really a sensation of speed. And I think it's maybe the perspective or the field of vision, but the game feels, I mean, it's in almost like a widescreen, but I don't know if it's because of that, but the game just doesn't feel as if you're motoring along. So you can be at top speed like I am now, and it feels like you're in a, you know when you play Gran Turismo and you're playing the cars at the beginning and they're really slow and you don't really get a sensation of speed. It does that, but on the high-end cars as well, and that's not good. I mean, particularly comparing it to the Mega Drive version, which was really quick, and I think that's why it works so well. But just having a game that feels slow, it doesn't work very well. But the other thing you get on this version is you get this career mode, and I think this is a really good addition, and particularly one of the big problems with the Mega Drive, and well, even the 32X one as well, is you've got the 3 arcade tracks, which, you know, for 70 quid isn't really good value for money, and you've got the mirrored mode. But you've also got, you know, these extra 2 on the 32X, which is okay. But what they've tried to do on this is give you more value for money and give you a career mode and all that stuff. Right, I'll try another track. okay, this is a Alpine track, which is one of the new ones from the Saturn version of the game. But I think with the Grand Prix mode, just going back to that, or career mode rather, they give you really good value for money in that you get a totally different game, and I think that the pacing's quite different as well. And instead of having an arcade, fast style game, you've got to build up, and it's almost like, having your putt-putts in Gran Turismo, where you start off slow with no sensation of speed and then build up from there. Ooh, the frame rate's a bit inconsistent. But I think the main problem is that you've got to do 10 laps, and that's okay with the fast cars, but when you've got, the little go-kart, it's just like pulling teeth, particularly when you've got to the front of the pack after 2 laps, and you're just driving around and it's boring. I think that's a real problem with the beginning of the game. The end of it's a lot more fun. But these tracks are quite a nice new addition. You don't get them in the arcade mode. You've got to put a cheat in, and that's YXZ as your initials in career mode, and you just quit out and you get these in the arcade mode. But for me, the arcade is what Virtua Racing is. It's different, and I think if you play this version of the game, it's probably better to see it as 2 separate games. One is the arcade game, which is a little bit different with the 3 tracks or these with the cheat, or to just see it as a career mode and see it as almost like a reimagining of Virtua Racing. But the tracks, in a way, remind me, and this is going to sound contentious, it reminds me a little bit of Checkered Flag. And I think this is perhaps the game that Checkered Flag could have been, because clearly these tracks haven't been made by Sega, and they don't feel like the Sega tracks, but they feel a little bit more like the Checkered Flag tracks. But the difference here is that you've got a decent frame rate, and the controls are better, and you don't have terrible pop-in. And I wonder if, at the time, the Jaguar, well, I don't know if it was the Jaguar was too slow or the game wasn't programmed as well as it could be, but Checkered Flag could have been a really nice game on the Jaguar. And I remember at the time trying to decide between a 32X and the Jaguar, and I really wanted to play Virtua Racing, and that game was going to swing it for me. And then I saw Checkered Flag in screenshots. I hadn't seen videos at that point. That's me looking at the camera. I'd only seen screenshots, and Checkered Flag looked so much better, and having 10 or so tracks, I thought, oh, it's much better value, and I got the game, and no, it wasn't. Although the Jaguar did have, it wasn't just that game that persuaded me to buy the Jaguar, there were others. But yeah, we're talking about Virtua Racing. Yeah, this version's an interesting beast. I think if you've played the arcade one quite a lot, and you're used to the sensation of speed, or you've even played the Mega Drive one, which is really fast, and you want that on the Saturn, you're not going to get it here. It's different. But if you treat it more as a career mode game, where you start off quite slow and you're willing to accept that, and then get faster as you go along, I think you'll get a lot more out of this. It's certainly not. Pay attention. It's certainly not a conversion of the arcade game, warts and all. It's different. What did I hit then? Yeah, the collision detection's a bit weird, but I suppose it wasn't the original. Yeah, you still get all the camera views. Although I think on this version, the cockpit view is a little bit improved. It seems a little bit higher up from the road, so you can see better. So I think that's one good thing that's been added. Yeah, I still like this mode. It's almost like the Micro Machines mode, where you can, you're viewing from almost top down. Yeah, it always felt a little bit of a cheat, but there you go. It seems easy to play. Right, I'm waffling. So this is the Sega Saturn version, and it's a game that wasn't really a launch title. And I'm quite surprised. I would have thought that this would have been a good companion game to Virtua Fighter, but it wasn't. Sega decided to commission it to someone else, and they did that with Max TT as well. Waffling, right, this is Virtua Racing on the Saturn. It's a good game if you treat it as a game in its own right. I think if you compare it to the Mega Drive, the 32X versions, you might find it plays weird compared to those, but if you treat it as a game in its own right, as a Grand Prix career mode game, I think you'll get a lot out of it. Right, waffling. Thanks for watching.